Hello, everybody. My name is Joyce Placencia. I am the current operations coordinator here at AIRIE, Artists in Residence in the Everglades. And we are here today to share a wonderful AIRIE Asks conversation with our 2023 December fellows, P and Ashley. We are joined also by Kristina Reinis, who will be moderating our conversation. Kristina is an artist and a historian, as well as a former AIRIE friend. And just to give a little bit more context about who Artist in Residence is exactly and what AIRIE is. AIRIE Artist in Residence in Everglades is a 501c3 not-for-profit operating in the Everglades National Park and the greater Miami area. Artists are essential problem solvers who can reveal new narratives and solutions for social and environmental change through their artistic storytelling. AIRIE supports a paid month-long immersive residency for artists in the park to explore the intersection of arts and environment. In addition, AIRIE provides its own gallery space, organizes local events, fosters community with a diverse team engaged in the Miami art scene. Our AIRIE Asks is a monthly artist talk series hosted by us, as well as community members who act as moderators, and it features current, recent, and alumni AIRIE fellows. And so today we will be joined by our alumni fellows, December 2023 fellows, P and Ashley. So I will now be passing the mic over to Kristina.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm so excited that we can finally do this talk across time zones. And I think just to start this out, there are a lot of people coming on who are going to be familiar with your practice and some that won't. And so would love to situate this talk in your experience, your time, and your practice. So P, do you wanna kick it off?
Sure. So my name is P. I've started to call myself an artist, although under the banner of artist, there is a whole bunch of different things that I operate as. Those things being a curator, a dramaturg, a writer, a researcher, an artist liaison, a whole bunch of different things, but I think the amalgamation is best placed in artists. I generally focus on transdisciplinary work or trying to evoke a transdisciplinary, which I think for many people listening who are trans or queer, it's very sticky still, because I think it's in the amalgamation of trying to be brought into existence. So that looks quite unruly. I tend to focus on doing that work, particularly in the way that we language things, also the way that we engage with ecology by queering ecology, or I've started to say transing ecology. I was about to say transing equality, which also we can do.
Also good. Also good.
Also great. Also really great. But my outputs mostly at the moment anyway are written pieces. I work in publishing. I am at the helm of two publishing platforms in London. One's called Worms Magazine, the other is called Sissy Anarchy. And also I run workshops teaching people how to write or how to find wellness through writing, in a program we call the Compost Library. I feel like there's many other things to say, but maybe it'll come up as we're talking. But I'm super happy to be here and super happy to get this chance to chat with you both. So thanks. Oh, I should say actually I'm originally from Australia, so-called Australia, from a place called Meanjin, which is Brisbane. But my base is in London.
Thank you. Ashley, you want to go? And then we'll dive into the more fluid conversation.
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Ash or Ashley, and I am coming to you from Aranda country in Mbantua in Alice Springs, in the very center of so-called Australia in the desert region. And it's freezing, which is interesting. and very different from your climates, I would assume. I'm a dancer and choreographer and dramaturg, and I also work a lot with community in projects that use dance as a tool for expression and for cohesion and social change. Um, my work in dance is also very varied. And yeah, I guess at the moment, a lot of my choreographic work is focused on thinking about our futures and how ecology and what we can learn about the future from looking at the past and looking at things that are overlooked, maybe. And yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say right now.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
Yes, hello.
And P and I met a few years ago, and we've worked together on a few different projects since then.
Yeah, various different things. Actually, like quite a lot in the scheme of things at the moment, but yeah.
And this was your first like collaboration, like official collaboration. Like you guys had worked before, right? But this was kind of the impetus of both of you bringing your practices together and living in a studio apartment in the Everglades in America. I feel like that's such a way to kick off a creative collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
I mean,
real like dive.
yeah, I think also like we have a tendency of working together with a lot of intense conversation. And so it kind of felt right to maybe like bring the context or make the context just as intense as the way that we hold space with one another. So like going to America in the middle of the Everglades, surrounded by this like foreign environment that neither of us were like attuned to, felt just like, yeah, the biggest extreme, but also hopefully from Ashley's perspective as well, like the best extreme.
Totally.
I'm curious how like being, and then we'll shift to the Everglades and more specific to the experience, but you guys have this like long distance creative collaboration relationship. And I'm curious about that like 1 month intensity out in the Everglades. Like, how has that sustained y'all's collaboration? Did it create like a basis of new shared experience that you've pulled from? Was it just like one thing along the way? Like, how did that change or adapt what collaboration means for you both, especially for people whose work has to do with ecology and reciprocity and community?
I feel like there was, I mean, in the first couple of days, maybe a week, there was a lot of fidgeting with one another, coming into contact with another person's habits and the way that they occupy space and the way that they meander through thinking and then having that thinking reflected onto an environment and then back again. Was like quite interesting to be a witness to, but also know that I was being witnessed in that as well. And so it created this like dynamic, I think, between us where the idea for us was to become more intimate with what each of us were doing separately. And that separation was kind of defined very vaguely in the beginning few days of me like wanting to really dissolve writing or find a way of languaging ecology or languaging my relationship with my own identity with ecology. And Ashley, I don't want to speak for you, but Ashley coming to do the same, but through a choreographic or dancerly lens and seeing how we would, transfer or transmute those ideas onto one another. And then finding these really interesting ways of coming together on the basis of, okay, cool, yeah, the Everglades has this interesting thing about dissolving or the nature of things not existing there for long or it being bordered and boundaried and mechanically looked after by humans and thinking about, like our practices then in relation to something that can come together with one another. Um, what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, it was a pull to become more intimate with one another. I think that's what it has done. We unfortunately live in different places, and so that's like quite a difficult thing to sustain. But for me anyway, it's kind of changed the way that we think with one another, even when we're in separate places. I still feel this like memory emerging from the time there, of distinct like moments of being really drawn into the way that Ashleigh inquires or questions things. Um, so I feel like, yeah, my practice has kind of been shaped by the time together.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. And just to add that before coming to the Everglades, we passed a lot of time in separate countries as well. And so I felt like when we first arrived together, it was like, oh, I'm like re-meeting this person, because when we collaborate over video or like from a distance, we are only kind of getting certain parts of each other, I suppose. Like there's so much that goes on beyond the screen. And so when we come together for these collaborative moments, it's really like punctual and really focused to whatever like project we're kind of collaborating on at the time. And so I guess coming to the Everglades and having this really intense experience, I feel like I first got to like re-meet P in a new environment, which was great because you don't have the other layers of like known things. So re-meeting P and then like really getting a chance to like open all of the other bits that we don't get to like experience so much of each other. And then, yeah, I would agree that the longevity of that is difficult because of our distance, but I feel like I have a greater understanding of their work and her mind. And I feel like we have also a lot of shared language of like the spaces that we went to and the people that we met. And those are experiences that we can like have like strengthen the foundation of our collaboration as well.
Mm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that you guys took that jump together. And while it was in this like really, you were saying that this like foreign transient environment, the same time, I think a lot of the ethos of the Everglades in that space really matches a lot of what you both are looking at with like movement and transition and with time. And so Ash, I wanted to ask you a question, because while I'm not a dancer in any means or involved in performing arts, when I do think about movement and dance, I do think about this transience and temporality and embodiment, which also makes me think of the Everglades. It's a river of grass. It's constantly moving, it's shifting, it's flowing, and some of it, it seems still, but there's this constant kind of cycle of life that's happening. So I just was wondering what it was like being a performer living and working in that environment.
Pretty overwhelming, actually.
Yeah.
I think like all the things that you just mentioned are so true. Like the environment is in constant motion, and I feel like a lot of my work as well until this point, I'm obsessed with time and how time is passing and how we have these different timelines in our bodies and also in the environment and in the way that we move through the world. So I feel like in the Everglades, that was something that was really present to me in my body, and like trying to, or in the beginning, needing to like settle into the river time, grass time of that location. And then because of like receiving so much information all the time, like particularly in our first 10 days was super intense, meeting people. And we also had all this energy, and we wanted to like see as much of the Everglades as we could. And so we were really like doing a lot. We were really in action, and we were like using our bodies to explore the environment. And I felt like this buildup of information in my body that was like, stacking up. And then what I really enjoyed was then to have the month and to have the time to digest, and then to see what was remaining and what I was like processing through the body. So I think I spent a lot of time in the, oh, what was it called? Like in our accommodation where there's that
Oh, the
covered
yeah, there's like
thing.
this screened in almost porch
Chicky, the
situation.
chicky.
The chicky.
Yes.
Yes, the screened in like place for eating. So I would like move all the tables aside and do these like long improvisations, just kind of floating through like the learnings and seeing how they were manifesting in the body. And that for me was a way of processing to then be able to come back with P and be like, oh, here's all the things that my body has learnt and that I feel like are relevant to our collaboration.
Mm. I will
So it
just
was
also
really,
add that. Oh, sorry, go
yeah, you
ahead.
go. No, you
No, I
go.
was also just gonna say like this practice of writing also is like quite physically demanding as well. And there is such a transience and temporality to the way that we experience the like memory. And there was this like task I had given to myself to, instead of writing on a blank document or in a journal, although I was also doing those things, I created this like Excel file. And after certain experiences, I would go through and kind of categorize how my body was feeling in those environments and how I was relating to my own memory of the experience so that I could try to physicalize my understanding of the memory in relationship with how I was experiencing my conversation with Ashleigh, so that there wasn't this like destabilized, you are a writer that is not physical, you are a dancer that is purely only physical. I think there was like this blurring that was happening even with our own practices of trying to bridge it together and like trying to make words didactic as they're coming, as they are abstract, as they are transient, as I said before, isn't something that just happens on a semantic psychological level. It also happens on a physiological level. And that's something that I think ought to be stated as well, because if you are a writer coming to AIRIE, it is a physically demanding writing process. Um,
And I like how you like, I was gonna talk about this later, but this is the kind of perfect, but you could see that physicality in the process in the space that you guys created. Your Instagram takeover was, it was beautiful. I was like, I remember being like, yeah, you guys can have extra days. Like, amazing. But one of the things that you were really gracious to show people was this, taking the butcher paper and stretching it across the walls and like writing the like not only the thoughts but like words and phrases and different like feelings and experiences all stretched across on this text in this like very embodied like kind of physicality way. And it's cool to know too that like you also had like a very usually I feel like spreadsheets and creativity wouldn't go into into one sentence, but like you also created this like categorization, almost like a scientific study, of like analyzing yourself and categorizing it in that way, in addition to this really like physical embodiment of the things that you were looking at. So I just think
And I think some of that like came also because it was a collaboration for me anyway, like a lot of the things that would usually stay inside or like maybe I'd just think about them in a more like ephemeral way. Like they had to become physical because it was an exchange and like having that piece of paper that you're mentioning is like, okay, here's like where we can put the tangible or take our thoughts and take our separate experiences or our separate interpretations of the same experience and like really put like pen to paper in the sense of okay, it becomes something beyond us and so we can then step back together and like observe those things, which I found really helpful because I often live, I think, in the nature of my practice, like I live in the ephemeral in a way, and the work that I do, it disappears. That's just the nature of it. It doesn't really last, and it's always in motion. So yeah, I think that, and that takeover as well was like a really great moment for us to be like, oh, okay, let's like use this as an opportunity to like see what we have so far and like see where we've come from and where we want to go, which was really fun.
Mm. That's like a lot of the anxiety that I have as an artist that or like as a writer, if I'm just talking about writing specifically, like that so much of the process is working in the singular or the fantasy or the romanticized version is that, you're a writer at a desk with a lamp on in the middle of the night and a thought has struck you and it's so overwhelming that you must get up and you must write it down. That's not the reality of how I write. I also have like a scattering of notes everywhere that to anyone else's vantage would not make absolutely any sense. But to me, somehow there is this like structure, but it's not like this thing that like is always placed somewhere. It comes and it goes, and these th feelings, I think anyway, you have to catch them. And I imagine with dancing as well, you have to catch them. And when you do find it in the body, or when you do find it in the right way of phrasing something, then you can work from what you've caught, like we did with the butcher's paper, move away and then reflect back to it something else on top of it. So then it is like transmuted into this other formed thing. Um, which is, yeah, something that was like fun between our process as well of like watching each other try to like little insect traps, putting them around the house, like here comes a butterfly, quick, get the net, like
Going.
or
I
actually
also
I should
wanted
say it wasn't butterfly, it was mosquitoes.
Yes, yeah, I was about to say you're in the Everglades. Well, there are butterflies. We had an amazing
it's
fellow
true.
who
That's
did
true.
studies
Actually, we
with
did
that
see a
too.
few, yes.
Yes, but mosquitoes are definitely more prevalent.
Yes.
You know, we love them. They
Totally.
serve a purpose, I think. What were you to say, Ash?
I also just wanted to add one more thing to your question about the being a performer or working with movement in this landscape, which was that I found it very difficult to actually move in the landscape itself. And P and I had like a lot of conversations about the environment was so full and had so much history and living energy, or like it's so alive and it's changing all the time and it's on its own rhythm. And if you're standing still, the Everglades is just like it's just giving you all of this images and energy and animal, and like there's just so much going on that I feel like we questioned a lot, like the placement of the body in this space and what it means to place a performing body in this space. And I feel like it's something that we didn't quite land on any answers, but it was really interesting to struggle with this idea that like what's already there was so whole in a way. Um, and I guess being visitors to that land as well, and not, not locals to Miami, or not having like any prior connection to that space, just being like, okay, this is already existing and it's breathing and it's on its own path, and like where is the role of my particular body in this place? So that's just something that we've still been wrestling with, I think, since then.
I think like from my experience living there like for 3 months, especially during the summer when it was really hot, like the Everglades reminds you that it is not there for you. Like it is there, and it is doing its own thing. It is going through the movements to protect its own ecosystem, and you really just have to come and meet it on its terms, which was a thing that was really, and I think that that's like most nature like spaces, but like I think for me, like, and what I think you guys are touching on is it feels really apparent there, like the fullness within the Everglades and where it meets you. And actually, I was think speaking about like the transience and kind of, sitting in its own, one thing that you and I talked about was the Everglades as this queer space of just like that movement and that flowing, and then also with queer ecology and like queer studies, this like subversion and this changing over what people's expectations are or what they expect a space to be or a person to be. And I was just wondering, as someone who has dedicated a lot of her time to researching and teaching others about queer ecology, what does it mean? Like, how did that methodology affect your experience in the Everglades and your lens, but also how did being in the Everglades specifically maybe like inform your practice of that methodology moving forward?
Yeah, well, the exciting thing about queer ecology is that it renegotiates ecology and biology, looking at those traditional sciences and transforms it into something completely different by breaking them down and questioning the authenticity of them. It's not this project to completely disregard the traditional sciences, which we had a lot of time to learn about whilst we were there, but it's a way of approaching our relationship with ecology so that we might understand how to transform it into something different. And the reason that is so essential is because so many of our policies and the laws that govern us, or our bodies, or our relationships with nature and species are founded on the ways traditional sciences are practiced and how they define things, which we need to renegotiate, especially because as a trans person and a queer person, those laws are quite essential for our livelihood. In the Everglades, I didn't feel surprised that everything presented itself to me as like distinctly trans and queer, although the language that was presented to us was anything but, because the emphasis during tours or in training from the national park are structured in a way that they make more palatable those traditional sciences that they've come from, which are like super beneficial to be engaged with. It just doesn't include trans or gender variant thinking, which is especially scary, obviously, within the political climate of America right now, the political climate across the world, particularly in London. Although, a hot take, we're about to become the leftist country in the world with our surrounding um counterparts who are creating devastation for trans and queer people. So I'd say that my like experience was guided by looking around what was presented to me and trying to speculate on how, I could look at some of the more like irreverent or simple facts that I was being offered and how I could lead that into thinking about the Everglades differently, thinking about the ecology of the Everglades differently. And that one of the things that comes to mind now is like that presented itself with the cypress trees and how they could reproduce themselves sexually or asexually, which leads me to this like beautiful connection to the way that some trans people experience desire during their transition, their sexual desire, questioning their sexuality before realizing that they have an inherent ideological gender inhibitor that's going on inside of them, gender dysmorphia, if you will. Or, it can be that during their transition, they're faced with no longer being sexually active because they're going through hormonal replacement therapy. They're medically transitioning, and so sexuality on an endocrinological level is changed forever. And so, like, we get to go for the walk on to the Cypress Dome. It's about the alligators. It's about seeing an alligator whole, but then this like subtlety of the cypress trees being asexual or they can produce sexually is just like this reformation of actually what we're here for in exploring this space, or how we can engage with this space, understanding that actually like we have a species here that could very well be a part of this like queering of ecology. It already is inherently doing it. And so how we come to language that is really essential. It's only fleeting in what we get to experience there, but it is so essential to the way that this space is built. And finally, for my own process of being there, I'm able to see myself, or I'm able to feel myself. I'm able to relate that my hormone replacement therapy is in some instance here, because at certain periods of time with my own desire, I will go from sexually to asexually active. And it's really interesting because, like, on a molecular level, I am changing with that. And as is the cypress tree, the cypress domes. So that methodology, I mean, like, was something that I took there with me, but it's also like influenced by the space so much. I mean, that is the essential thing with reciprocity, and the way that you're looking and the way that you're hearing or the way that you're experiencing is to like really look toward it and listen to what's already there. I also wanted to say as well that like just thinking about the way that we're like traversing in that space as well, we unfortunately weren't able to come into contact with the indigenous people there. So we weren't able to see how like the Calusa or the Tequesta or the Seminole people would traverse the space. And so I feel like there would be this other like really interesting learning that I think also could, in some sense, find a way of being articulated as like queering. I think also this idea of like queer ecology, we have to look at like the word queer. What does it mean to actually put queer onto ecology? Is it essential? Queer is inherently a phrase that we use as activists. If I say I am a trans queer person, it doesn't mean that I am just a trans person. It means that I have like some sort of activism at the center of my practice. More to the point of what I was saying before in the beginning of what I was talking about of like transing ecology, there is this like ideological shift happening at the moment where to say that you are trans means that you potentially are very politically engaged on the basis of having to be, because it's very difficult to be trans. And so there's this idea that like to say trans queer is a double activist phrase, when really I don't know if it is. I would prefer I just be called woman. Maybe ecology would just prefer to be called ecology, you know? So those are the things, I mean, like those are the things I've kind of been thinking about taking away from the Everglades. And like I said before, yeah, that methodology is just like in constant process and constant flow. Mm.
Yeah, I had this is like more on a personal note, but when I was in graduate school, there was like this, some people would just put queer on the front of studies, and I was like, but what do you mean? I was like, remember this moment, I was like, what does that actually mean to change a methodology? It wasn't a resistance to it, but I remember, I took like a queer theology class, and it was, I took that mainly because I was like, what does this mean when you like apply it to that space? And it was, I like had the privilege of having a really great professor that was like, here's all of the things that it can mean. And I was like, well, we're starting somewhere. So it's great, even as, reciprocity is really at the heart of a lot of the work that you do and Ash, you do. But what that means is like definitions and methodologies that you spend so much time in do consistently evolve. And
Mm.
like they evolve and change to the places that you bring it to. And
Yeah, yeah, like trying to, this is something that we were talking about when we were there as well, particularly with the ground of the Everglades
it's Lou.
is like porous limestone.
Mm-hmm.
And so like even just thinking about how we can like develop that or implement that into our methodologies, it's like you have to remain porous to the environment, otherwise the environment will harden against you, you know? And so there is this like back and forth. It is a dialogue, but sometimes that dialogue is so, like messy. Queer people love to say that their practice is messy. But what does that really mean? Um, Particularly because like I don't think the things that we're doing are that messy. I think they're actually quite strategic.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I'm drawing from is um like Imogen Binney or Mackenzie Walk, really great writers, trans writers who are trying to develop like a trans literary lexicon. It's very difficult because what you have to do is actually present to people present to heteronormative culture that trans people have normal lives. We have boring lives. We have lives that are day to day, filled with day-to-day tasks that are just the same as everyone else. And so they're trying to implement in their work this idea of repetitive failure, where it's like, here's me trying to be a trans person, but I fail at the circumstance of being in a heteronormative patriarchal world that requires of me to normalize. And so then I create more mess, I create more failure of myself, of my identity in the context of all of this mess, this other big mess, that then it just is cyclical. So I think like I'm getting to the point now where I'm like I've spoken way too much about this and I can forever, but like, what if it's not a mess anymore? What if the mess is like more porous than we think? What if the mess is already in the sciences and in the ecology, in the traditional way of thinking? What if it already exists there? It's just that we're not looking for these like minute details and exacerbating them in the same way we would if they were the other parts of the Cypress Dome, not just being a home for an alligator, but being this other thing as well, its own individual identity with its own like crazy experience of being able to asexually produce. What the hell? That's incredible. It's like revolutionary, and we're walking through slewing in this log, and it's just like a passing comment, and I'm standing there like, sister, family, kindred, I see you.
Yeah, and speaking of that, the like even just the transience and temporality, I think it keeps coming up, and like that just kind of brings me to Ash thinking about your work, and you deal with a lot. I'm like, we love what a like strong transition to this, but I'm like, you look a lot at like the apocalypse and like the idea of these like apocalyptic messages, but I do think
I do.
like I like, so I'm just especially, I know you have looked at a lot of different environments or ecosystems that are in danger, but the Everglades is particularly in danger of being lost, and specifically like drowned by itself through, these man-made barriers, which is piece something that you brought up. So as someone who like looks at not just like movements through the body and talking about, but specifically this kind of like apocalyptic narrative and connecting with, I guess one quick thing I'll say, I'm sorry, and then I'm like gonna let you go on, is
Fine.
I used to be someone who was like very shut off from climate crisis. Like if it came up, I would like shut down. I wouldn't want to talk about it. And through my time like working at AIRIE, which I'm so grateful for, and the experience being in the Everglades, I was able to, and meeting artists like you guys, I was like, oh, I can actually engage in this and want to participate in it. And it made the apocalypse like less scary to talk about, but also to talk seriously about. So I think you also have such an openness and warmth when you talk about your practice, but then you're talking about these like really real crises. So I guess it's a two-pronged question of like, what is it like, being a person who looks at that and works with that, being in the Everglades, it's at risk, but also how does dance like or art act as a way to get people to really engage with something that can be as like crippling as climate crisis anxiety?
I mean, I guess they intersect those questions, because I feel like the way that I can engage and not be crippled is through art. Because yeah, I look around and I'm like, whoa, this is not good. And yeah, so I feel like it's difficult to look at it, but I feel like that is our responsibility as artists, or in my particular interest as well. It's kind of like my drop to, if I can create work that speaks to this in a way that is, I intend for it to be somewhat hopeful, or like I intend for the work not to just present like this is the problem, but actually like, can we reimagine it to be like this, or like if we are going through this changes and this future, like how can we have a role in that? And the body is a really good tool for that because we all have one. And so we can see ourselves reflected on stage or wherever the work is being presented. So I feel like, yes, the content can be really crippling or like can be really debilitating, but we can be in action, and that action can help us move forward into the future. And I hope that the work has a hopeful tone in the end, although I'm not like denying the fact that it's not particularly joyful content. But I feel like I can present work that highlights this reciprocity or that highlights community or highlights care as things that we have at our disposal and things that we can use to really shift the narrative. Because I feel like in my experience, we have this apocalyptic narrative that is very like, and it's an explosion and it's like the end and everything is like flattened. And I actually feel like this apocalypse is more like something that is cyclical, something that has happened before on a natural level. The earth is a restless place. The earth is changing all the time. It's not new for the environment to be shifting. It's just that we are shifting it in a really rapid pace. So I feel like these kind of crises are constantly unfolding, and that constant unfolding means that I think that we can have an impact to kind of shift where we're going. And I feel like in the Everglades specifically, it's a really interesting kind of like conflict in a way, because like there already was all this destruction, during colonization. And there's been all of these, we learned about a lot of restoration plans that have been happening in the Everglades. And we learned that actually like all of the water is managed by humans. And, that all of the luscious environment that we were walking through or that we were experiencing was actually kind of helped along by humans after they destroyed it, then trying to like bring it back. And so I feel like it's a space that has survived. And although it was a space that was quite full of this feeling of destruction for me, I feel like it just is what it is in the end. And now it's facing new challenges. And I feel like it's a lesson for us also in this idea of letting go, because yes, the Everglades might disappear through to sea level rise or, myriad of other things, but I'm also not sure that the Everglades was meant to be permanent in like in of itself. All landscape is kind of shifting and changing. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
I just wanted to add to that as well, like I think we have a responsibility to decolonize our thinking from the belief that we are not a part of nature. And so that like permanence of what you're bringing up, Ashleigh, like we know that we're not permanent, and we know like landscapes are not permanent, but we have this belief that we're like going to institute and build things that will last much longer than we ever will. A lot of the conversation that came up between Ashleigh and I was like, what about the process of finding ways to decompose everything that we've built, everything that we've like worked toward in our own arts practice, more specifically? Like, what would it mean to decompose words as a reflection on relating to this like decolonized thinking of like it just can't sustain in and of itself. It can't be sustainable in and of itself to live forever or to exist forever. that's all I have to kind of say as well. But I just want to like get that across. Like there is a responsibility to recognize that, like we're a part of it. The proximity with which people live to the Everglades as well, and some of them have never been, is like so fascinating to me. Probably is coming from this anxiety of the space being so unruly, and like it has this hard-edged, dangerous man aesthetic to it where, like you're going to come here and you're going to see some crazy animals, some pythons, and you're going to go hunting and you're going to see some alligators that are like brute or like have brutality to them. Once you're there, it doesn't feel like that at all. There's something quite sensual about the space in knowing that it is in constant motion and that that motion sets course to everything that exists there. To know that then there is this thumb over the top of it, the management system of the waters surrounding it, I feel like provides people a little bit of an anxiety of knowing like all of it is, it's kind of like it's becoming anyway, which is sad. This like colonized Disneyland where it's an adventure park. It's not something that is like natural anymore. I'm getting away from myself, but it's just
I think is like you're reminding me as well of how much I mean, I was really shocked by the proximity of Miami itself to the Everglades. And like, yeah, I knew it was close, but I guess until I was there, I wasn't like, oh, whoa, okay. It's like you have these two really, really different spaces existing right next to each other. But then actually the same challenges are facing both of those environments. I felt like I spoke to a lot of artists, and I saw a lot of art as well being made about sea level rise. And like, this is an anxiety that regular people are also living with every day. And that those same challenges are being faced in the Everglades and the reliance of one ecosystem on the other. And I feel like it's a really interesting space for that of like, it's not so far away, even though it feels like another universe when you're in the Everglades comparatively to Miami, but actually they're one and the same somehow. And I feel like that's super related to this apocalyptic narrative or like our desire for permanence. And how, yeah, that was something that I feel like really drawn to in my work and will continue to kind of wrestle with these contradictions, I guess.
Yeah, and Miami is the Everglades. Like it's like in the
Yes.
Everglades, like the insane with like Big Cypress all the way to Lake Okeechobee. Like it
yeah.
extends and it's become this like, which we love the park system. It's it's of course it has its very troubled history, but it's been important for some like land preservation. But then it's sometimes because of that, it becomes like, oh, Everglades National Park is the Everglades, and that's it when it's like so expansive beyond that. And one thing that Houston Cypress, who leads Love the Everglades movement, part of the Miccosukee tribe, wonderful, wonderful person. But one thing that I've heard them say, just like at different talks and stuff, is, it's like, oh, the Everglades, it feels so far away, but you turn on your tap, you turn on the shower, and you're connected to the Everglades. Because the water source, it's literally the water source for South Florida. And I think that's such like a powerful image of like, oh, you don't feel connected to the space. Well, you just washed your hands or you just like got a cup of like glass of water. You're connected to the Everglades. You don't have to be fearful of making that leap because you're already there. So might as well come down and like do work for it. And I like that because I think it also it gets over that like fear, you know, valid to be scared of pythons. Like, there are those different parts, but I do think that creating that bridge, right, of like you're already connected helps to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, I really love that imagery as well.
Yeah, and
turn it on.
turn it on. Yeah, I'm just reminded now as well of like how flat the landscape is there. And that's also something that was really striking to us I mean, I live in the shadow of the Yiparinya, of these like amazing mountain ranges here in the desert, and like even growing up in Mianjin in Brisbane, it's like the mountains are kind of all around you, and so wherever you are in the city, you can see nature. You feel close to it. But I remember we had a lot of conversations about the flatness and like how that flatness maybe feels like creates that distance as well, because Miami is such a built environment. Like you can't really be connected
Mm.
in the same way. But as you're saying, Kristina, it's like, yes, you can. It's right there. just drink some water and it's gonna be, you're there. You're part of it. So that was just like really interesting experience that something that I never considered about like the landscapes that I've been living in the
Mm.
past.
Mm. One thing that got touched on like a lot through all the different questions, but I wanted to ask a little bit more explicitly, is another part of your Instagram takeover is you posted about all of these books, and it seems like text was impactful for both of y'all. Even, obviously Peter writer, but as you were talking about like being able to come back to that space with the words on the wall, and you posted all of these books, which I was like, how did you guys get through so many? And I was just, what was the one with the largest impact, but also like, what is the importance of text when speaking about the Everglades and literature as well? And I know there's been like lots of little touch points on this, but I would love to hear y'all's reflections or any recommendations too of like, as people who, are not from here and actually international fellows, like what helped kind of ground you in this space with the literature that was in the AIRIE cabin.
I'm gonna let Ash go first on this one.
Okay, actually, it's not from the AIRIE cabin, but I actually have it here.
Ah, your book, we were like,
I
your
was like, no, it just was coming upstairs and I saw it on the shelf and I thought, oh, I'll grab it. But this is Fieldwork for Future Ecologies, um, edited by Bridget Crone, Sam Nightingale, and Polly Stanton. And yeah, I don't know. I picked up this book like very last minute as I was kind of running out the door going to the airport, and it just like is a compilation of texts and kind of different artists who work in research-based practice. And I thought I didn't realize how relevant it would be, but it kind of was great to be able to read about what all the other artists, how other artists had interacted with different landscapes or different experiences or different spaces, and the work that had come out of those things. And I guess coming to the experience, P and I we didn't have a specific project that we were developing together. Like the experience was really about coming together and learning about each other and about the space. And so I guess this book was just really great in the sense of, okay, others have done it, and these are all the ways that others have done it. And yeah, I just really enjoyed the way that it talks about this research process as like a really valid way to create art. And I feel like it's something that I'm really interested in. Like I've been lucky enough to travel to different landscapes and do these kind of different residencies. But I feel like there's still not exactly the culture of doing that in my circles, like in the dance field, maybe. And so, yeah, I just found it a really like beautiful text to come to being on this residency, and that validation that like, yes, being here and going through these experiences in a collaborative way is really valid and will like generate something in the end. Because I felt like our time in the Everglades, we read a lot of books because we actually had time to do so. And so this kind of expansive time was really wonderful, but also sometimes felt a bit like, whoa, I'm floating in this like expansive time. So it was just great to have, yeah, to have these kind of inspirations.
Mm. I didn't read much about ecology whilst I was there, and I think that kind of served me well. I read a book called Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler. And that was an interesting book about a trans person that was able to shapeshift. Um, whether or not that was to like disclose themselves, to hide, to attract what they wanted, to come closer. And then I also read a book called The Observable Universe by Heather McAlden. And that book is really interesting because it's a whole bunch of metaphors on HIV and the rise of the internet happening at the same time. And the idea that metaphor is a way of deriving meaning about what is true in our lives is quite interesting in the scope of just thinking about how we language onto ecology certain experiences or facets of it as being relative to queerness or transness. What those two kind of both gave me during my time there was that I don't think we will ever be able to really find the language it ought to take to unionize us against like climate devastation, against transphobia, in order to pull closer to build a relationship with ecology. What I mean to say more simply is that there is no real way of being able to speak distinctly to one another because it is constantly shifting, as is Paul in Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl, as is the internet and HIV on this chronological line, shifting one another and shifting the perspectives of how one another and how each, the internet and HIV, the endemic, interacted with one another. It's like when you start pulling these parallel lines over things, that then you're able to shape this thing I'm talking about of metaphor or truth. I'm only ever in proximity with what is on my mind and what is around me in my context that will then form the story or form the narrative or form the memory. And so speaking to the Everglades, it's just really difficult to say how how the process is so much about the resonance, the material that you have, the language that you're yet to develop, and knowing that that language will emerge, but trying to offer it what it needs. And is that time? Is that more exploration? Is that more information? Is that more didactic or synthetic responses? I'm still yet to figure out that in my own process, but like to say that it is important is not enough. I don't have the words to reflect that, like engaging with literature, however that presents itself to you, if it's essay, if it's autofiction, if it's poetry, prose, whatever, is like such an essential thing in being able to understand ourselves in proximity to something else. And then when you draw the lines together, it makes something else again. And so it's always shifting, it's always mutating. It's never it's never going to be the same. I mean, I'm trying to think about what I would feel when I go back again, and would I pull back into this Excel of trying to categorize things, or would I take a different approach? And I don't know, but
Mm.
it's just it's important.
I know. I think that if you were able to summarize in like one quick little thing how it relates, then I think that, no, that was beautiful. And also, thank you so much for just both of y'all's times and intentionality and thought that you guys brought to these questions. I'm so honored to have been at AIRIE while you guys were in residence, and so glad to be friends with both of you. And before we close off and pass it off to Joycelyn here, is there anything that you guys want to promote, like bring attention to, anything?
Yeah.
P, sorry. I'm like,
You go, Pete.
As I mentioned at the beginning, I run two publications, Worms Magazine and Publishing, and then also another thing called Sissy Anarchy. So like follow me in those spaces. We're up to no good all the time, working with underrepresented writers, the feral, beautiful creatures of the world. And so there's publications coming out, there's magazines coming out, there's other material coming out, like journals, that really shift form, I believe, anyway. Um, like really interesting stuff. I think also I have a personal account if you would like to follow me there. It's very like trans activist focused. I don't have like anything specific to promote, but I wanted to say a huge thank you to Kristina and the rest of the team that we were engaged with from AIRIE, Arsima, of course, for having us, because it was such an intense time. It was such a powerful time. And it's something that's like lingering with me and has like deepened my practice, not only with myself, but also with Ashleigh and other collaborators subsequently. So just a huge thank you for having us. And hopefully we get to come back at some point in time. I mean, all things considered, if America is safe to come to.
Um, yeah, you can find me on my personal accounts if you want to follow me, or if you want to have a chat about AIRIE or anything else. I'm super open. I have a show called Sub that P was worked on as the dramaturg, and that is coming to Sydney in August. So if anyone is on Gadigal land, come and see that. Or yeah, I don't know, just reach out if you want to connect. And yeah, echoing P's sentiments about our time in the Everglades. And I think the repercussions of our residency will be echoing for, well, it's been 7 months so far. So I think for a long time to come.
thank you both so much. And I'll do my little quick. Yeah, you can find me just KristinaReinis.com or Instagram. And for like immediate things for Miami folks, if you're part of the Soho House membership, I'll be teaching a workshop there August 14th. So you should come build little cardboard houses with me. So that's my little thing coming up. But no, I'm so thankful for both of y'all. And thank you, Joycelyn, and I'll pass it on to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Ashleigh. Thank you, Kristina. This conversation was absolutely beautiful. You can check out this conversation and share this conversation with your community. And you can direct them to our YouTube channel where they can see this talk at AIRIE Everglades on YouTube. And it is also going to be uploaded in audio format as well for those who prefer a more podcast style of listening. And you can listen to that over at our podcast platforms on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon podcast. And to learn more about AIRIE and stay connected with us, you can visit us at AIRIE.org and also visit our Instagram at AIRIE Everglades. So thank you all so much. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.